Kia ora everyone. Thank you very much for coming here this afternoon. Today we are announcing an increase of $128 million to tertiary providers to degree and above courses for the next 2 years. This is in addition to the increase to 5% to tertiary subsidies that were announced in Budget 2023, which of course was the biggest increase to these that has happened in the last 20 years. We've been able to do this as a result of reprioritisation because of an underspend due to lack of enrolments or declining enrolments in the tertiary sector. But I think from my perspective, one of the most important parts of the announcement that we're making today is that we are giving this money for the next 2 years. At the same time, we will be conducting a very thorough review of the tertiary education funding system, having a look if it's for purpose, and this will include the performance-based research funding as well, which is incredibly important. Now, in terms of the contact that we've had with the sector, I have been in contact over the last week with the Chancellors and the Vice-Chancellors from the universities in particular around where they see the big issues in education and the tertiary education funding system. They have agreed that a review is probably overdue in this space, and when I've spoken again this morning to them, pretty excited. Universities New Zealand have said that they're very excited about this prospect of a review, and it does give us that time over the next 2 years to conduct that. So I'm going to hand over to Minister Robertson, who will add to this.
Thanks very much, Minister. Yeah, just to pick up the point around the review, I think I would be among the first people to say that this is a review that is needed. We have a model of funding of tertiary education that has proved itself to be unsustainable, and we have a number of different sources of funding that we need to think about altogether. So it's a review that we've effectively given ourselves 2 years to get right. So the additional funding that the Minister has noted is for 2 years, and then by that time the review will have been completed and we'll be in a position to be able, I hope, to implement the findings of that review. The second thing I wanted to say was that in addition to the two matters that the Minister has mentioned, another thing that you'll see in the media release today is that we have asked the Minister of Education to come back to Cabinet by the end of July to report back on whether any of the changes that have currently been proposed by universities would mean that we would lose capacity across the country or lose programs or courses entirely across the country. We want to make sure we're continuing to provide a range of programs and that we uphold the capacity of people who particularly do research in our system. So the Minister will be working with MB, the TEC and the Ministry of Education to make sure we can reassure ourselves that none of the proposed changes would lead to that loss of capacity nationwide or loss of programs nationwide. Thirdly and finally, I just want to make the point that we recognise that this is a long-standing issue for universities in terms of where their balance sheets sit. The government is stepping up to the table with additional funding, as the Minister's indicated, of around $128 million. That is on top of a 5% funding increase. That means for the next couple of years, you've effectively at the degree level and above got a 9% funding increase for these institutions. We would ask the universities, who are autonomous and do get to make the decisions about how that money is utilised, that they think about using the next 2 years to manage their way through as we do the funding review, and ask them to look again at the proposals that they've made, whilst recognising that given the long-standing nature of some of the issues here, that they may not be able to walk back from all of the proposals they've made. A final point in relation to that, you'll note that the funding we've announced today goes to all institutions that provide degree level courses or above. While the focus in recent times has been on Victoria and Otago universities, a number of other universities have had to make very difficult decisions over recent years as well, and we did not want to disadvantage those institutions by simply giving funding to the two that happen to be in the news right now. Degree courses are provided in a range of different institutions, and all of them will benefit from today's announcement.
Why is it taking so long for the government to come out with funding for universities?
Well, in terms of the actual amount of money that we put in, as I said in the budget, and the Minister said we had a 5% increase, so we have been stepping up to the plate. In conversations since the budget, clearly it's we've seen that a number of the balance sheets of universities are really under significant stress. You have to bear in mind that when we started the budget process, the university sector was reporting that it would have a surplus and that enrolments would be going up by at least 2%. They're now reporting a deficit and enrolments will be down by 3%. So compared to when we started the budget process to now, the circumstances are very different.
Are you not throwing good money at a sort of failing system? And will the review come to any view on, how much of this is just economic mismanagement as well?
Certainly, that's why we're asking universities to look at what they are providing and how they are providing it. But that's the intent of the review, is to look at, is the system fit for purpose, what tweaks need to be made. And look, in the past we've had reviews of different parts of the system. We need to look at this system as a whole. We can't just be tweaking around the edges here. We have to look at the system and see which parts interact with each other.
Yeah, look, I do think there are reasonable questions to ask about how money has been spent in recent times, and I know that on campuses around the country, many of the staff who are affected by proposed cuts have expressed exactly those concerns. Just following on from what the Minister has just said, I mean, ultimately the model is what colloquially is called a bums on seats funding model. It's also one where we have a level of competition within our university and higher education sector that possibly is not justified for a country the size of what we have. I know from many years ago those concerns have existed and they've only got bigger. So it's not easy. It hasn't been easy for anyone running any kind of organisation in a high inflation environment that we've been in the last couple of years. But there are a lot of questions I hear from staff and students about the way universities are managed. I think the funding review will shed a significant amount of light on that.
Can you explain how the funding's been sort of allocated between the various universities? Was it based on enrolments or need?
Yes, it's based on enrolments, so it's exactly how the tertiary education subsidy is allocated now. TEC will work through the finer details of that because that is their role. We have given an indication today around what universities are likely to expect as their funding, but of course that will be worked through at a finer detail when those enrolment numbers are known.
Minister, is it your expectation to start to reverse some of the course cuts that have been announced, in particular, like much needed courses that they've now set up, or should it?
Well, ultimately those are decisions for the institutions. We do not make those decisions. There is institutional autonomy and that will be up to them. What we're asking the universities to do is recognise that there is now a 9% funding increase effectively for degree and above providing institutions over the next 2 years. That does give them the opportunity to have another look at the proposals that have been made. But as I noted in my opening comments, we also recognise this is a long-standing issue for some of these institutions, so we can't pretend today that this will solve all of their problems, but it certainly represents a very significant increase in funding.
Minister, you said in that review you might look at other sources of funding. Would that be in addition to state funding, or in so what?
The scope of the review will be worked out over the next few months, and I have been asked to come back to Cabinet in December detailing what the scope of the review will look like. But at this stage we have signalled that the performance-based research fund will be definitely part of the review. Everything else we're still having those discussions around.
I mean, universities have multiple sources of funding already. They have funding that we provide them through the government and through the tuition subsidy, through the PBRF. They obviously have international student revenue. They have revenue from their commercial activities and research and so on. So there's already a wide range of sources. I think the point the Minister was making earlier is a good one, which is we've looked individually at a number of bits of that, including the PBRF in recent years. What hasn't happened is a holistic look at the whole tertiary funding system, but also some of those underpinning issues like the competitive model in a country of 5 million people and how sustainable that is. So I just want to answer this question because it's been asked here, is it a bailout? No, and we never said it was.
And it tells us that a review would actually prevent something like this happening again where all these universities are facing such massive cuts.
Well, my view is that a review is essential to make sure that we get a sustainable funding system. There are a lot of reasons why universities have been put in the position they have. Bear in mind that the two universities that have been most recently covered, Victoria and Otago, both have more staff now than they did before COVID. Other universities through the period of time recognised that given the funding system of bums on seats and enrolments that they needed to cut their cloth. Different universities are in different circumstances, so it's hard to answer your question directly. What I do know is that a thorough funding review, as the Minister has indicated, will be welcomed by everyone in the sector.
Why is it not a bailout? Why is it not a bailout?
It's not a bailout because it's a contribution that we've stepped forward with to say to universities, we can see the pressure you're under. You're clearly under a great deal more pressure than when we started the budget process. A bailout, I think, would mean effectively going in and paying all the costs that the universities have. It's definitely not that.
And just follow on, so does it need to be kind of a reality check for some universities that they might have become unsustainably large?
I think that's something that is part of this, and really and I've said I had that meeting with Chancellors and Vice-Chancellors, and I will continue to meet with Chancellors and Vice-Chancellors over the next wee while as well as we get this worked out. But certainly there's been a recognition in the conversations that I've had that we do need to take this overall look, and nothing is out of scope. I don't think that it's a recognition of that question completely, but I think that's part of the discussion that we will have together going forward.
Isn't it important that we need to know that this sort of thing isn't going to happen again since taxpayers are funding this?
Absolutely, and we do not want it to happen again. I mean, universities have from time to time in our history had deficit positions. I recall in the 1990s, universities found themselves in deficit positions for a variety of different reasons. Bear in mind that when we started putting the budget together, there was forecast to be a surplus across the university system and enrolments were forecast to rise. That's the basis on which we were all working. That did not turn out to happen, and that's part of the picture we've got here. I'd also suggest to you that there are some longer term issues that universities do need to take a look at and recognise their own structures, their own administration costs. Equally, part of it has to be how do we better coordinate the resources that we do have across the universities and the broader tertiary sector. And I think that's what the Minister was saying about the funding review, nothing really been off the table. It has to look at overall funding in that wider tertiary sector.
Just look at some of the uncertainty over the past few months with some more recent job losses, restructuring and a lot of our academics and scientists, a lot of uncertainty there. Do you think as part of this review it needs to be a look at within universities how there can be more certainty for the staff?
As I said, nothing's off scope at this stage, but what we can say is that a strong academic sector within this country is critically important to our development of our workforce, development of our research. This is something that we don't want to see fall over, and so we want to work with the sector to make certain that we have the best possible funding mechanism going forward. But in that journey, in that journey of discussions, I'm quite certain that other things will be brought forward to that discussion as well. I'm really looking forward to this piece of work. I think it is an exciting piece of work going forward that will only strengthen our tertiary sector.
Will the review look into any specific sort of costly decisions universities made? I'm sort of thinking of Victoria University's name change perhaps, making decisions like that in a difficult financial environment.
I'm not sure it'll delve deeply into an individual university's decisions, but what it should do, and what I hope it does do, is look at the overall funding environment. And over the years I've observed increasing amounts of money spent by universities on marketing. There is questions I have in a country the size that we have as to whether that's useful spending for us. So I think when we look at the overall funding environment, we do need to ask ourselves some questions. The flip side to that is we also do have to respect institutional authorities. Our degree providers play a really important credit and conscience role in our society, and we need to respect that, but we're also the funding bodies, so we have a balance to strike there. I mean, I would make the point that I know it's been an incredibly difficult and stressful period for staff right across a number of our universities. It's also important to note that our universities still remain high quality. They're still providing really good programs and really good experiences for students right across the country. And while it's incredibly hard and difficult for the people who are at the sharp end of this, I don't think we should lose the perspective that our universities, our degree providers, are still providing a good experience for students and still producing high quality graduates.
Just on the issue of fewer than expected enrolments, is that to do with international students, and does the government take some responsibility for that re-COVID settings, immigration, things like that?
There's actually a whole lot of factors that make up this, where we're at the moment. And to be fair, I've not long been come back from overseas where the same issues are happening globally, so we're not alone in this. But at the moment, we've got this tight labour market as well, and we know historically that when we have a tight labour market, that there are fewer people that are going into tertiary level study as well. We notice that it's not just the degree level, it's the sub-degree level that we see this happening. So there's that. We do know that international numbers are down, but again, that is happening globally. We are not alone in that.
Fairly simply, that was the amount of underspend that was available within Vote Tertiary Education, fees free, so obviously we had low enrolments, and the overall tuition subsidy. What would normally occasion, given the pressure that universities and other degree providers are under, we made the decision to recycle that money back. It's for 2 years as indicated. I think it does give some breathing space for our universities. It's the government stepping up, and now we have an opportunity to work through the next couple of years with this important review.
Great.
Thanks
Thank you very
everyone.
much.
Cheers.